The Real Life and Sad Ending of John Holmes, John Holmes documentary. John Holmes was born John Curtis Estes on August 8, 1944, in the small rural town of Asheville, Ohio, about 11 miles south of Columbus. He was the youngest of 4 children born to 26-year-old Mary June Holmes, but the name of his father, railroad worker Carl Estes, is left blank on his birth certificate. Mary had married Edgar Harvey Holmes, who was the father of her 3 older children, Dale, Edward and Anne. Mary changed John's surname from Estes to Holmes when he was a child. In 1986, when Holmes applied for a passport for the first time prior to a trip to Italy, his mother reportedly provided him with the handwritten copy of his original birth certificate, which led Holmes to learn that his biological father was Carl Estes. As a child, Holmes enjoyed a reprieve from his turbulent home life when he visited his maternal grandparents, John W. and Bessie Barton. Mary divorced Edgar when Holmes was a toddler and moved with her children to Columbus, where they lived in a low-income apartment project with a friend of Mary's and her own 2 children. The 2 women worked as clerks and waitresses in order to support their young children. When Holmes was age 7, his mother married Harold Bowman on December 31, 1951. Shortly afterward, Holmes and his family moved from Columbus and settled in the small town of Pataskala, about 17 miles east. Holmes recalled that Bowman was a good father until Holmes' younger half-brother David was born, at which point Bowman reportedly lost interest in his stepchildren and began neglecting them. Holmes left home at age 15 and enlisted in the Army, with his mother's written permission. He spent most of the 3 years of his military service in West Germany in the Signal Corps. Upon his honorable discharge in 1963, Holmes moved to Los Angeles, where he worked in a variety of jobs, including selling goods door-to-door and tending the vats at a coffee nips factory. During his stint as an ambulance driver, Holmes met a nurse named Sharon Gabenini in December 1964. They married on August 21, 1965 in Fort Ord, California, after Holmes turned 21. In April 1965, Holmes found work as a forklift driver at a meatpacking warehouse in nearby Cudahy. However, repeated exposure to the freezing air in the large walk-in freezer after being outside inhaling the desert hot air caused him severe health problems, leading to a pneumothorax of his right lung on 3 occasions during the 2 years he worked there. Sharon also had health problems, as during the first 17 months of her marriage to Holmes, she miscarried 3 separate times. John Holmes was to the adult film industry what Elvis Presley was to rock and roll. He simply was the king. In 1971, Holmes' career began to take off with an adult film series built around a private investigator named Johnny Wad, written and directed by Bob Chin. The success of the film Johnny Wad created an immediate demand for follow-ups, so Chin followed up the same year with Flesh of the Lotus. Most of the subsequent Johnny Wad films were written and directed by Chin and produced by the Los Angeles-based company Freeway Films. With the success of Deep Throat, 1972, Behind the Green Door, 1972, and The Devil in Miss Jones, 1973, porn became chic, although its legality was still hotly contested. Holmes was arrested during this time for pimping and pandering, but he avoided prison time by reputedly becoming an informant for the Los Angeles Police Department. By the late 1970s, Holmes was reputed to be earning as much as $3,000 per day as a porn performer. Around this time, his consumption of cocaine and freebasing were becoming an increasingly serious problem. Professionally, it affected his ability to maintain an erection, as is apparent from his flaccid performance in Insatiable, 1980. To support himself and his drug habit, Holmes ventured into crime, selling drugs for gangs, prostituting himself to both men and women, as well as committing credit card fraud and various acts of petty theft. In 1976, Holmes met 15-year-old Dawn Schiller, whom he groomed and abused. After he became desperate for money, He forced her into prostitution and often beat her, which he did at least once in public. In the 1981 biographical feature documentary Exhausted, John C. Holmes, The Real Story, from director and Holmes confidant Julia St. Vincent, Holmes claimed during an interview segment that he had had intercourse with 14,000 women. The number had in fact been invented by Holmes to help salvage his waning image. The true number of women with whom Holmes had sex during his career would never be known. In late 1980, a mutual friend introduced Holmes to Chris Cox, who owned the Odyssey nightclub. In turn, Cox introduced Holmes to Eddie Nash, a drug dealer who owned several nightclubs, including the Starwood in West Hollywood. At the same time, Holmes was closely associated with the Wonderland Gang, a group of heroin-addicted cocaine dealers, so-called for the row house located on Wonderland Avenue in the Laurel Canyon neighborhood of Los Angeles, out of which they operated. Holmes frequently sold drugs for the gang. After using more than his share of the gang's drugs, Holmes was in trouble with the gang. In June 1981, Holmes told the gang's leaders, David Clay Lind and Ron Launius, about a large stash of drugs, money and jewelry Nash had in his house. Holmes helped to set up a home invasion and armed robbery that was committed on the morning of June 29, 1981. Although Holmes was not present during the robbery, Nash apparently suspected he had a part in it. After forcing Holmes to confess to his participation and threatening his life and those of Holmes' family, Nash dispatched enforcers and Holmes to exact revenge against the gang. In the early hours of July 1, 1981, 4 of the gang's members were found murdered and a 5th severely battered and near death in their row house. Holmes was allegedly present during the murders and left a left palm print over one victim's headboard, but it is unclear whether he participated in the killings. Holmes was questioned but was released due to lack of evidence. He refused to cooperate with the investigation. After spending nearly 5 months on the run with Schiller, Holmes was arrested in Florida on December 4, 1981 by former Los Angeles Police Department homicide detectives Frank Tomlinson and Tom Lang. Holmes was extradited to Los Angeles, and in March 1982, he was charged with personally committing all 4 murders. After a 3-week trial, he was acquitted of all charges except committing contempt of court on June 26, 1982. After his release from Los Angeles County Jail for contempt of court in November 1982, Holmes quickly resumed his film career with a new generation of porn stars. His drug addiction continued off and on, and although work was still plentiful, it was no longer as lucrative as it had been with the advent of cheaply made videotapes that saturated the porn market. Most of the feature porn films and videos he made during the 1980s were little more than cameo appearances. In February 1986, 5 or 6 months after testing negative, Holmes was diagnosed as HIV positive. According to his second wife Laurie Holmes, he claimed that he never used hypodermic needles and that he was deathly afraid of them. During the summer of 1986, Holmes was offered a lucrative deal from Paradise Visuals, which was unaware he was HIV positive, to travel to Italy to film what were to be his last 2 pornographic films. Holmes' penultimate film was The Rise of the Roman Empress for director Riccardo Schicchi. The film starred Holmes, the later Italian Parliament member Ilona Cicciolina Staller, Tracy Adams, Christoph Clark, and Amber Lynn. His final film was The Devil in Mr. Holmes, starring Adams, Lynn, Karen Schubert, and Marina Hedman. These last films created a furor when it was revealed later that Holmes had consciously chosen not to reveal his HIV status to his co-stars before engaging in unprotected sex for the filming. Not wanting to reveal the true nature of his failing health, Holmes claimed to the press that he was suffering from colon cancer. Holmes married Laurie Rose on January 23, 1987 in Las Vegas after confiding to her that he had AIDS. During the last 5 months of his life, he remained in the VA hospital on Sepulveda Boulevard in Los Angeles. On March 13, 1988, at age 43, Holmes died from AIDS-related complications, which per his death certificate, were described as cardiorespiratory arrest and encephalitis due to AIDS, associated with lymphadenopathy and esophageal candidiasis. His body was cremated, and his widow Lori and mother Mary scattered his ashes at sea off the coast of Oxnard, California. Goodbye, John Holmes.